please join me in welcoming Chairman Peter DeFazio.
Good afternoon. Thanks for being here. Just arrived, and I'm looking forward to a couple of days here. No one knows better than you the challenges that are facing our transportation network and our infrastructure. Mayors, I was a county commissioner. You're closer to the people and closer to the problems, and you get the phone calls at night about those problems. So you're right on the front lines. That's why I invited your president, Stephen Benjamin, to join me at the Democratic Issues Conference in April to talk about the needs to invest in America's infrastructure. We need to invest more in roads, bridges, transit, water systems, airports, and restore our crumbling and outdated and overburdened infrastructure. At the same time, thank you. At the same time, we can't keep investing in the same ways and expect different results. We need to transform federal transportation policy to modernize what and how we build. We need intelligent systems that can help mitigate congestion without expanding our roadways. We need to be able to move people and goods more safely and efficiently, build more resilient facilities with longer lifespans to withstand the changing climate, and invest in electrification and carbon reduction. There's no avoiding the biggest single challenge, which is to secure a dedicated, sustainable revenue. The Fixing America's Surface Transportation Act, so-called FAST Act, expires on September 30th, 2020. Now that may seem quite a ways away, but given the inefficiency of the United States Congress, that is right upon us. And at that date, we won't be able to just roll the bill over because that would mean a reduction in spending. The first year would only be $4 billion, although since we need to increase spending, that's going to hurt a lot. The next year would be $17 billion reduction. So we have to address the shortfall in the Highway Trust Fund. You know, this used to be kind of a wonky topic, but now this is something that most Americans get. If you look at the polls, people really want to see us come together across the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, whatever, and work together to rebuild the infrastructure. The federal government has been shirking its responsibility while 31 states have raised their gas taxes and registration fees and others to raise revenue since 2013. In 2018, 70%, and many of you were directly involved in this, 70% of local road and transit ballot measures passed, more than 400 local funding measures and 30 public transit measures. Red states, blue states, purple states alike. And not a single, and this is why I keep trying to tell my colleagues in Washington, not a single elected official that I'm aware of has lost their job because of making the case and getting authorization. And we did a lot of question and answer, and they said, well, look, everybody you got all these people who want to do this, you have business, industry, individual. Go on and on. I said, why can't it happen? And they kind of had me stumped for a moment. I said, well, wait a minute, okay, I can give you an image here. And so actually once I got to go to the South Pole. And I was at the South Pole. I was by Shackleton's Hut. We had a day off from the work because it was too windy to go out on the icebreaker that day. And I was down there with the Coast Guard. And there were all these penguins just shuffling around, and they're on the edge of this cliff. And they had just molted, and so therefore they could go back in the water, but they hadn't eaten for like 7 weeks, and they're really hungry. And they want to go in the water, but they're all standing there. They have these things down there called leopard seals, which are really mean, really fast. They can catch a human on ice. And they love to eat penguins. That's their favorite diet. So all the penguins are standing there just back and forth, back and forth. It's like, God, we got to do this, but no, what's going to happen? So finally they push one guy off. And then they all look over, and then they all go, arr, 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 like this, because he didn't or she didn't get eaten, so they all dive off. That's what I'm trying to tell my colleagues in Washington. If we do this together, nobody's going to get eaten, no one's going to lose political advantage. We haven't adjusted the excise tax since 1993. And so the buying power has dropped 40% with inflation. And then, of course, we have more vehicles on the road, traveling more miles, but the vehicles are more efficient, so they're using less fuel. So even though theoretically you would think, wow, we got a lot more people out there driving a lot more miles, we'll have more revenue. No, I mean, actually, revenue has continued to be totally inadequate. We've had to put $144 billion from the general fund and other imaginary places. We're actually borrowing money to put in the trust fund right now since 2008. And over the next 10 years, it's predicted will be $176 billion, $17 billion a year short. Now, this is just for existing investment, which is totally inadequate. I'll get to that in a second. The federal, the needs from, our investment has decreased 20%. DOT says we need $836 billion backlog of unmet capital investment for highways and bridges, $100 billion, and this is just to bring things up to a state of good repair, not to build out, to mitigate congestion, build new projects. Same with transit, $100 billion to bring transit rail up to a state of good repair. We're underinvesting by $37 billion a year in highways, $10 billion a year in transit. There are 47,000 bridges on the national highway system that need substantial repair or replacement, let alone the bridges you have in your local communities that are critical and need the investment. Now, for a brief time, about a month and a half ago, I was pretty excited we might get this done. We went to the White House at the request of the president, and we sat there, and he had some opening issues, but we got past those. And then the president turns to the speaker, and he says, well, Nancy, what do you think? And she says, well, Mr. President, we really need to increase our investment in infrastructure. She says, I'm thinking $1 to $1.5 trillion. And the president thinks for just a little briefly, and he says, no. And we're like, oh, God. And then he says, 1.9 trillion. And we're like, okay. And he says, no, wait, 2 sounds better. 2 trillion. We're like, okay, we're on board. So he bid himself up. And then we got into more specific discussion because there's some people who want very, very broad definitions of infrastructure. And we agreed on transit, highways, bridges, wastewater, drinking water, and broadband. The president was on board for all those things and all those investments. And then we got to the point of, and this is where the penguins come in, like, okay, how's this going to happen? And Senator Schumer is pushing really hard. Well, Mr. President, you've just got to go out and tell people you're going to raise the gas tax. And then, the president's like, So anyway, I finally said, look, why don't we, let's have another meeting. Everybody put their ideas on a piece of paper, no names on the paper, throw them on the table. We go through them, we pick some, and we all walk out the door together. And there's going to be no disadvantage, and we're going to get something done for the American people. No one can use it politically. Unfortunately, when we came back for the next meeting, the president's chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, who was a founder of the Freedom Caucus, he basically doesn't believe in government. He certainly doesn't believe in federal investment in infrastructure. In fact, he wasn't at the first meeting, luckily. He was in California, but he managed to, get press from California saying he didn't support what the president and us, what we'd agreed to. And then he came back and he started a whole campaign in the White House. He brought in Grover Norquist and everybody else, and next meeting with the president went south. So, but recently, just this last week, the president was talking again to the speaker, and he expressed interest in doing infrastructure yet again. I think he really wants to do it. And so we're hopefully we'll be meeting in July and try and get to some decision on revenues. So I can't give up on this. We also, as we write the new 21st century, first 21st century really in my mind, even though the FAST Act was enacted in this century, but really looking to the future, we've got to look at new revenue options for the future. We're going to have more and more penetration of non-fossil fuel vehicles. So we're going to, I would like to do a national pilot for vehicle miles traveled. My state has done a couple of pilots on this issue. And, we could move forward pretty quickly in the trucking area with vehicle miles traveled as a substitute because you don't have the privacy issues because all the heavy trucks now have electronic recording devices in them there are with individual vehicles, there's questions about how you're going to bill, how you're going to collect, and privacy issues that have to be resolved. But we need a 21st century transportation infrastructure bill. And the few things we can do, we want to harness innovation. We want to have smart infrastructure. I don't know how many, I don't think anybody in the room is going to raise their hand if I say this, how many of you haven't been frustrated sitting in a traffic light when no one's coming the other way? And, there are systems that actually do real-time adjustment of the lights depending upon traffic flows. We've got to look at deploying more and more of those. We've got to get more use out of our existing infrastructure. Metered lights and vehicles that can read the metering. Those three things together, actually, they estimate could save 6 to 10% of the fuel that's burned every year by mitigating people idling in traffic and congestion, also obviously mitigating air pollution in your cities. We need to look at a whole range of mobility options. We just had a roundtable on mobility issues and all the new alternatives in mobility. I wouldn't ride a scooter around here. It's pretty congested, but I don't know if they have them. And they have, by the way, I keep bothering the scooter people, and they now have invented inflatable helmets that you can put around your necks, because all these people riding scooters are a disaster waiting to happen. And I've ridden them a couple of times, but we need to prioritize safety investments. A number of cities have adopted Vision Zero, which I believe originated somewhere in Scandinavia, I think Sweden. We get a lot of good jobs out of this, but we also have to focus on job access and training. And Los Angeles is going to actually have a focused residential high school for people to get skills to go into infrastructure and construction, things that relate to infrastructure. We have to build it so it lasts longer, it's more resilient. I was recently up at Oregon State University, and they're doing some incredible work. A major source of carbon pollution is cement kilns, and there are processes that can use the existing kilns that will reduce the pollution 50%, and then they can go beyond that. They've actually invented a concrete negative, carbon negative concrete, which is, I can't explain it, but you can get in touch with them and ask about it. We have the strongest Buy America requirements of any part of the federal government, and yet there are still some loopholes, and I'm going to be plugging those loopholes, and not to be mean to anybody who's here, but anybody who's dealing with CRRC. They are predatory. They are owned and run by the Communist government of China. And they want to run our manufacturers and others who are manufacturing here out of business. And they do as much value added overseas as they can. And it will just be yet another industry lost. So you should not be contracting for their vehicles. We also have to look at protecting our natural resources. My Republican colleagues keep saying we need more streamlining. We've done streamlining in every major transportation bill, the last 3 bills. And DOT hasn't even implemented all the streamlining we did yet. I said, well, how about we see how well the streamlining we've already adopted works before we decide we need more streamlining. The most frequent cause, according to the experts, of delay of projects is funding, not environmental rules or public review. So, as mayors, you certainly know the cost of doing nothing. Your infrastructure doesn't deteriorate in a straight line. It gets worse quickly. The costs go up very quickly. So if you add the money now to do some rehabilitation, you're going to save a lot of money in the not too distant future. But again, we haven't been great partners on the federal level, and I intend to do better on that. And a lot of the country's wearing out. Amtrak just accommodated the committee. They put together a special train with a viewing car, and we viewed all of the best engineering work that was done between 1872 and 1930 in the Eastern Rail Corridor. The tunnels under Baltimore were built in 1872. It is raining inside the tunnels, and they're brick. We don't know how much longer they'll last. The Portal Bridge in New Jersey, when they open it for ships, when they put it back in place, they have to send out a crew, including a really big guy with a sledgehammer to knock it back into place. And then we got a special midnight tour of the gateway tunnels under the Hudson, which were updated in 1930. Unfortunately, they flooded during Sandy, and the concrete has been penetrated by saline, by salt water, and the concrete is spalling, and every once in a while the 12,000-volt cables short out, and it takes about 5 days to repair one, so they need to be replaced. They say, well, we can't afford it. Well, it'll cost about $16 to $20 billion. If the tunnels fail, it's going to cost $27 billion a year, and it'll take 4 or 5 years on an emergency basis. So if you don't invest now, we're going to pay one heck of a bigger bill later, and I think that you are very well of that. I don't want to go into it longer here, but let me just say I've introduced 3 bills. Trying to deal with the fear of the gas tax. I've introduced a bill called a Penny for Progress, which would just index the existing gas and diesel tax, cap the annual increase, no matter what inflation is, at no more than 1.5 cents a gallon a year, and we could bond $500 billion over the next 10 years to not only fill in the hole in the trust fund, but to substantially increase spending on needed projects, begin to bring things up to a state of good repair and build new capacity. And I always say to my colleagues, raise your hand if you think you're going to lose your election if gas goes 1.5 cents a gallon. Now, no one ever raises their hand, but I still haven't been able to move it. The Harbor Maintenance Trust Fund, we collect a tiny, you probably don't know it, but there's a tiny ad valorem tax on every imported good you buy that came in a container. It's minuscule, but it raises a substantial amount of money. And for years, Congress has every year been underspending the trust fund. So there's now a $10 billion balance in the Treasury. And yet, our largest harbors are at about 40% of authorized depths on a daily basis. I have smaller harbors where the jetties are failing, they're silting in, and it's like, we don't have the money. Yeah, we have the money, we just have to spend it. And this seems like a no-brainer to me. I've moved it out of committee twice, but Paul Ryan, the former speaker, had it taken out of the bill twice. It's even in Washington, D.C., you can't spend money that you collect from people on things that you collected it for. But I've moved that bill out of committee, and I'm going to move that bill through the House this summer, and this speaker is not going to take it out of my bill. And then, we have airports. Many of you have airports, the airport concerns. Congress, I was the original author of the passenger facility charge on the Democratic side. It was a bipartisan proposal, user fee at airports. And we haven't allowed airports to increase that fee since 2001. And the airlines will tell you, this is like their number one issue to beat me on this issue. They say, if I raise the passenger facility charge $2 or $4 per boarding for passengers, no one's ever going to fly again. It's totally price elastic. And I said, well, what about when we were doing the last FAA bill and you all raised bag fees by $5? Oh, that's different. And I said, yeah, that's different. That goes in your pocket. And you don't pay any tax, you don't pay ticket tax on it, so it's much more gravy than anything else. So I'm going to try and beat them. It'll be an interesting struggle, but the airports are doing a much better job of showing their unmet needs this year than they ever have done before, and it's a huge and growing problem. And then finally, wastewater. Now, Congress, again, is weird. Drinking water is over in Energy and Commerce, but I'm working with the chairman over there. We want to do a major initiative on both wastewater and drinking water. We haven't done a SRF wastewater bill since 1987, and I'm trying, my committee is very bipartisan, I'm trying to work it out with the Republicans. I want a number that's bigger than they want to go to, but the needs are bigger even than the number I want. So I'm hoping to bring them around, and if you have wastewater needs and you run into any of the Republican colleagues on my committee, you might tell them about your wastewater needs. So, there's a huge potential coalition out there for this. I mean, we've got the Trucking Association tax us. We've got the independent truckers tax us. You get the U.S. Chamber of Commerce promoting taxes. We've got the AFL-CIO promoting taxes. We have a whole host of organizations promoting additional funding for infrastructure investment. And if we are absolutely relentless, and we have to be relentless. I've been pretty relentless, but I need a little more help here. Relentless. Talk to your representatives. Talk to your senators. Talk to anybody you know associated with the administration. Push hard. You know, like I say, they brought in this guy, Grover Norquist, and he said, no, you can't raise the gas tax. That's a tax. Well, there was such a relentless push from the inland waterway users 3 years ago that Grover redefined the diesel tax as a user fee. Well, guess what? The gas tax and the diesel tax, those are user fees. They're the most appropriate, and today the only way to pay for these major investments we need. Many of you have done this. We need to do it at the federal level. We need to be a better partner, and I'm here to enlist you in that fight. So thanks very much for having me here today. I appreciate it.